Hello interwebs, I hope you're doing well, especially for this video because it might get a little bit contentious because I want to do a little bit of a response video to a lot of the comments that I saw coming out of my video that I did last week surrounding the firing of Gina Carano by Disney from the Star Wars The Mandalorian show after a number of social media posts that she made were, at least by some, seen as controversial, seen as harmful, seen as possibly offensive to different communities, namely the Jewish community, in particular for one post, but she also did stuff around the trans community and politics in general. So after all that stuff, Disney decided to let her go, and I had a few comments about that. And in the comments section of that video, when the comments weren't done in bad faith, which there were a significant amount, which I find kind of hilarious considering I talked about bad faith commentating in my initial video on Gina Carano, but that's beside the point. There were a few good faith comments that I saw that kind of had two recurring themes and trends to them that I want to address because I feel like while they are specific to Gina Carano's situation, they are kind of touching upon larger issues and themes that we have as a society,
we live in a society,
have been kind of dealing with these past few years, and these conversations that we've been having these past few years, kind of framed as like the right versus the left, that sort of like constant narrative of like the right is fighting the left and we all hate each other, cancel culture conversations. So I kind of want to take these two specific comments and sort of extrapolate it out into a larger conversation about what's been going on. And so the first comment that I saw recurring over and over and over again was sort of this idea that me saying that, oh, I agree with Gina Carano being fired from the Disney Mandalorian show, that Disney deciding to fire her was hypocritical of me as sort of a leftist because, there are people that have been fired by Disney in the past that I, or the left as the whole, is sort of like seen as the left, have called for being rehired or were outraged that they were fired for. And I said that like, oh, I was bothered by these companies firing these people, but I'm not bothered by Disney firing Gina Carano. Specifically, the ones that were called out were, for example, Ray Fisher from the Warner Brothers films, how Ray Fisher, after calling out Joss Whedon's abuse on the set of Justice League and calling for an investigation, has been kind of let go from future projects in the DC universe. He's sort of not doing any more cyborg stuff in the DC universe, as well as, for example, James Gunn, when he was also fired by Disney for a lot of Twitter posts that he made years ago over the course of his career that were sort of seen as offensive and sort of making fun of pedophilia, things like that, which is awful. And sort of people saying like, oh, I was being hypocritical because I even wrote an article for The Advocate, for example, about why I thought James Gunn's firing was a bad move and why I think Ray Fisher's firing was a bad thing because of the fact that he was calling out he was calling out potential allegations of abuse against Joss Whedon for those things. But I didn't say the same for Gina Carano. Which is like, oh, you're being a hypocrite because you're picking and choosing which things to go on. And I think there are two things to kind of break down within that. The first one is these situations are all kind of different, right? Like James Gunn, in my mind, yes, I think James Gunn's tweets way back when he was younger were absolutely horrible. Like if you go back and read them, the specifics of them, they're not great tweets. They're kind of like the shock value humor that I get was popular at the time, but clearly have not aged well and probably were not really all that acceptable at the time either. Now, specifically, the reasons that I was okay with his tweets were because after that point, he had shown growth. He had specifically apologized for them, even without having been canceled for them. He had apologized for them. He had talked about them and sort of said, those aren't who I'm representative of. He showed remorse for his tweets. And by the way, I should make clear, though, that is my personal choice on James Gunn. That is my personal view on James Gunn. If you do not forgive James Gunn for his earlier tweets, that's okay. That's a choice that you can make. He is not owed being hired by Disney. He is not owed being hired by Disney, but I do think the reason that that he was fired, that those tweets were brought up, were being done in bad faith. They were brought up in bad faith. They ignored the growth that he had over years, and I thought the growth and remorse that he felt for those tweets, even before he got fired, was enough for me to feel like it was fine for him to be rehired, that I was upset that he had been fired for those reasons. But That is my personal decision on that, and I'm not telling you that's how you have to feel about it. You owe James Gunn nothing. I think all you owe him, to a degree, if you're going to talk about him, is to just be aware of the totality of the conversation around him, understand that the reason he was fired was being done in bad faith, and then come to your own conclusions based on the evidence of all the evidence and context in front of you, instead of just some out of context tweets that he made years ago. That's not to say you have to forgive him for those tweets, but understand the full context with which those tweets now sit in, given that it's been years since they happened. So just being clear there. Ray Fisher's situation is different as well, in the fact that he is being let go because he is, in my mind, doing the right thing. He is calling out or at least he is alleging that there was abuse on the set of Justice League by Joss Whedon, which, has not been officially confirmed, but there are a lot of other people that have come out, namely Charisma Carpenter recently, that sort of like show a pattern of behavior over years that kind of indicate that these allegations may be true. But again, they're allegations, being clear there. But if those allegations are true, then Ray Fisher being sort of like let go, fired from his role in Cyborg, the Cyborg role, would not be a good thing. Whereas I look at Gina Carano, and we could argue all day about whether or not we find her tweets offensive. I personally do. I think they are offensive. When it's in my particular mind, Gina Carano has shown no willingness to apologize for them or show growth for them. In fact, she's doubled down on them in most cases, saying like, I did nothing wrong. This is what I believe. This is what I'm standing. So I disagree with her tweets, and I think they are harmful and hurtful, specifically like the trans ones. For me as a trans person, I can't speak for the Jewish community. We'll talk about that in a second, but I know one of her tweets was seen as anti-Semitic. We'll talk about that in a second. We will get to that. But sort of those tweets, Disney letting her go, that's something that I personally agree with, because she has shown no remorse for those. I particularly find them harmful. So these situations are different and distinct enough that I sort of like that I have different reasoning for them. I don't necessarily see it as hypocritical for arguing for one or over the other. But this kind of gets us to the larger issue, in that why these all kind of like seem surface level the same, because they're all about big companies firing somebody. And so it's like people were saying like, oh, you're okay with big companies firing somebody and not other people, and it's sort of a freedom of speech thing. And let's just be clear here though, because I think this is something that people sometimes miss in this conversation. I don't agree with the reasons for why Disney fired Gina Carano. Because the reason that Disney fired Gina Carano was because her words, that Disney did the calculus and basically decided that the things that Gina Carano was saying, if she was allowed to keep saying them, were going to cost them money for their Star Wars show. That people were going to stop watching, that a certain number of people were going to stop watching Star Wars, The Mandalorian show, or Star Wars in general, anything with her in it. And that loss of revenue was going to cost them more than if they kept her on, and the people who supported her following the show. Disney sort of did this mathematical calculus and decided like, okay, the bad press we're getting for this show because of Gina Carano, like every time she says something, it says Mandalorian star Gina Carano says blah 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 on social media, that's going to cost us money in the long run, so we're letting her go because we just don't want to lose money. That's the reason that Disney did that. And the same thing with, by the way, with James Gunn and Ray Fisher. Again, I do not agree with those things, but Warner Brothers probably let Ray Fisher go because he was causing a lot of controversy. He was, quote, hurting the brand and was going to cost them money. They did the calculus and said, oh, we're probably going to lose money because of our firing of Ray Fisher. Same thing with James Gunn. When those allegations came out against him, the sort of like tweets stuff, and we can get into specifics of that, that's a whole other conversation. But Disney did the calculus and said, well, it's probably better to fire him because then we won't lose as much revenue. And they decided to rehire them because of, again, money decisions. Now, I'm sure there were some people, like individuals working on the scenes, like Kevin Feige, who reportedly advocated for James Gunn to get rehired, things like that. People pushing that were uncomfortable with Gina Carano's tweets that worked at Disney. I'm sure there were specific individuals within the company that had moral issues with it. But generally, the overall rule, the reason that these firings were done, these people were sort of let go, and I don't know if Ray Fisher was officially fired, by the way. I should be careful in that phrasing. He's clearly not being rehired for projects, so kind of a pseudo the same thing. The only reason that was done was over money. The calculus was money. In all of these situations, it was not morality. It was not, moral decisions driving the decision to let these people go, to fire them. It was money keeping them. And that is always, 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 always going to be the calculus that these big companies make. It has nothing to do with morality, at least not in the company's mind. Yes, if there's a financial incentive to do the right thing, these companies will do that thing. But it is always going to be about money. And so I want to make particularly clear here, while I am personally okay with Gina Carano being fired, because I personally took issue with the things that she said and I found them to be harmful. And again, we can talk all day about the specifics of those. I did in my initial video about those things that I found to be particularly harmful. We could talk all day about that and sort of have that argument. So while I do agree with the decision to fire her, and it will make me feel more comfortable watching The Mandalorian going forward on a personal level, I do not agree with the reasons that Disney decided to fire her for, because the reasons they decided to fire her had nothing to do with morality. They only had to do with the fact that she was going to cost them money, at least in their eyes. And so I just want to make that distinction clear, because we tend to get into this conversation, especially in fandom spaces, of like, oh, you're siding with CBS. You're a CBS I'm talking about Star Trek because I talk about Star Trek so much. That's why I'm using CBS. But like, oh, you're a Disney shill and you're shilling for Disney and you just want to take those Disney bucks. That's why you're defending Disney. It's like, it's either I'm like defending the big corporation or I'm not defending the big corporation. It's like, no. I'm not. I'm making individual judgments about a person that I'm watching, but I'm not siding with the company either way on these decisions. And I'm kind of tired of constantly getting mired in these conversations if I'm a shill, or if I'm like shilling for a big company or not, because I'm just having sort of a conversation about something. It's like, I'm going to like or not like a TV show or work, and I'm going to be honest about the things that I like about the TV show or work. I'm not being influenced by like, I want Disney to view me better, or I want CBS to view me better. Same thing with individual people. And while I may end up agreeing or disagreeing with a decision that the company made, I will almost never agree with the reasons that a company made a decision, which is almost always going to exclusively be around money. And honestly, I, as a leftist, hate capitalism, hate money. I hate what it does to our society, and I hate how the profit motive does not always equate with doing the good thing. Sometimes it does, but not always. And so I'm just tired of that constant conversation of it being like, you're defending the big company or not, because I'm not. I'm just not. So make that distinction clear. And so I just get tired of that conversation. The second comment that I kind of want to touch upon here, though, is the other comment that I saw around Gina Carano was, I made mention of the fact that the sort of impetus for her being fired was around a post that many viewed as anti-Semitic, that it sort of was talking about Jewish people being killed by Nazis. But immediately after after Gina Carano was fired, basically the very next day, Daily Wire, which is a company I believe owned or sharehold, I don't know the specifics of how the corporation worked, but in some way, shape, or form, Ben Shapiro, who is a Jewish man who is a conservative commentator who has some stake in this company. Basically, he tweeted out support for Gina Carano, and hired her to do her own movie with the production company Daily Wire. So she is now making her own movie, and Ben Shapiro, again, a Jewish man, is backing her. And I believe he even said in a tweet that her post wasn't anti-Semitic in any way, shape, or form. So a lot of people in the comments were kind of saying to me, but I think just in general, were like, well, look, a Jewish man supported Gina Carano, so of course what she said wasn't anti-Semitic. And sort of pointing towards one Jewish person to say like, oh, whatever she said was blanket okay. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this in generals and not the specifics, because I am not a Jewish person. I am not someone who can make the determination of whether something is harmful or offensive to a community, because only people in that community can tell you whether something was harmful or offensive. But even more specifically, though, like a community of people is a community of people who all have different voices and opinions, who may share a common identity, a common, factor in their life, the fact that they are Jewish, for example, but they may not always agree based on different factors in their life and who they are as people. Someone like Ben Shapiro, who is a Jewish man, may not find that post offensive, or he may even find it offensive and just doing it for political reasons, whatever you kind of want to believe. And Ben Shapiro is his own twisted quagmire that is also worth... Ben Shapiro has been discussed in many videos. I have many problems with Ben Shapiro, but not everyone in the Jewish community is going to agree whether that post was offensive or not. But people point to Ben Shapiro as this person who's like, okay, Ben Shapiro said it was okay. He was a Jewish man, so it was totally okay that this post happened. It wasn't anti-Semitic. But here's the thing. When you are not part of a community, like I said, you are not able to determine whether that community feels that the post was harmful or not. All that we can do if we are not part of a community, and I am not Jewish, is try to listen to the community and listen what the community has to say in general, and still make our own determination of what we feel about something. What I try to do is I try to look and find people on Jewish Twitter, on Jewish blogs, Jewish news sites, Jewish friends that I have, just sort of listen to them and hear what they have to say about the topic, and sort of try to hear what generally a community is saying about something. Instead of pointing to one specific person and saying like, oh, this person is part of this community and is saying this specific thing, so that totally makes it okay. Because there are always going to be differing opinions within a community. So all we can do if you are not part of a community is not point to one specific person within the community to let you feel okay about something, but listen to the community as a whole and still draw your own conclusions from it. You sort of listen to hear someone say like, oh, I found this post offensive for X, Y, and Z. You know, my experience as a Jewish person makes this offensive to me for this reasons, or I have family history with this for this reasons. And you're like, okay, I hear that. And I'm hearing that from several different people. I'm hearing that from like several different sources within the Jewish community. And maybe you'll hear one or two that people saying like, no, this isn't offensive for this reason. You sort of listen to this general discourse surrounding something within a community, because no community is going to 100% agree on something. Sometimes they will. Sometimes there's something so galvanizing that makes everyone agree on something. But generally, as a whole, within these sort of nuanced topics, you're never going to find 100% consensus within a community. And so I get bothered when people like point to someone like Ben Shapiro, who, like I said, is his own particular quagmire within the Jewish community and really political communities in general, just any community in general, to sort of like say like, okay, he gives an endorsement, it's okay. Again, I'm not here to say that it was 100% anti-Semitic or not, to speak over the Jewish community. I personally found that post that she made was, I found that it was anti-Semitic and offensive for my own self, but that comes from listening to the Jewish community, listening to what they have to say on the topic, and listening to what they're going to say. Because, like I said, no one's going to agree. If we take this to an example of the trans community, for example, is because I am a trans person, I look at someone like Blair White, who is a prominent conservative transgender influencer. And I almost always disagree with Blair White's takes on trans issues. I again, I'm not here to argue with her or cancel her or call her out. There's a whole different discussion to be had on Blair White. She is someone who I disagree with heavily. We are both trans. We are both in the trans community, both white trans people. We generally have the same economic backgrounds from what I can tell, but we disagree about things. So I get bothered when I see, conversations about trans topics and someone says, well, Blair White said this, so I think it's okay. This is totally not transphobic. Blair White saying like, oh, J.K. Rowling wasn't being transphobic. She was just saying this one thing. And so people say like, Blair White said it was okay, so we're done. Don't need to do any more research into that. One trans person said that this was okay. It's like, no, you need to listen to the community. You can't point to one specific person within a community and say like, they said it's okay, so it's tacitly, oh, fine. Because that's just like what you do when you say something like, my trans friend said this, I'm not transphobic, but my trans friend said it was okay. It's sort of like that old trope of like, I have a black friend, so I can say whatever racist thing that I want. It's like, just because one of your friends is of an identity, or one person you can point to is of an identity that says this thing is okay, does not mean that the whole community says it's okay and that it's not offensive. And by the way, I should make entirely clear, if you were someone in my comments who said like, look at Ben Shapiro, who he said it was okay, so I guess they weren't anti-Semitic. As long as you were saying that comment like with politely and not in bad faith, and not saying, hey, look how stupid you must feel now because Ben Shapiro is okay. If you were calling me dumb, that's its own other thing. I don't appreciate being called stupid. We don't need to get into that kind of language here. And I saw even worse language than that. But I am also not saying you are bad if you understandably said like, oh, Ben Shapiro said it was okay, so I guess it's not anti-Semitic. I understand that. It's a natural impulse that all of us have to be like, oh, this person in the community said that it was okay, then it's okay, right? That means it's fine. That like, I understand that there's a reason that we constantly get mired into this discussion, right? Because that's an honest human impulse, right? I get it. I totally get it. But we need to be careful of not applying a singular person's opinion on something and applying it into an entire community and then allowing ourselves to justify our own opinion about the entirety of that community's feelings on something, or the entirety of an action's harm or not on a community because one person in that community said it was okay. Because there are many intersecting things that may influence why that one person may be saying that. And again, Ben Shapiro is his own particular quagmire that I have many issues with in particular. But I'm not saying that he is not Jewish, that he can't speak on Jewish issues, but he is not the only Jewish voice. And so it's important to make sure that we listen to the totality of a community, in this case, the Jewish community, when talking about this stuff. But I understand the impulse, and so I'm not saying that you are bad for having that impulse. But I am saying that this is a perspective that maybe that you should be thinking about, that maybe you shouldn't just look to Ben Shapiro for all your opinions on Jewish stuff. That maybe you should listen to the Jewish community as a whole as opposed to just one singular person. And again, I say that too as a trans person, by the way. You shouldn't just listen to me on trans issues. Like, look, I will present my opinion on trans issues. I will do my best when I talk about trans issues to let you know what other trans people are saying about something, but you should not just listen to me on trans issues. I will try my best to be as informed and update and try and listen to the totality of the trans community and offer up the totality of the trans community's thoughts on something to you as best as I can, but I will fail at that. I'm not going to be perfect. And so you should be listening to whenever there's a trans issue that comes up, listen to a multitude of trans people. Like, I want you to support me. Don't get me wrong. Please support me. Please listen to me. I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to me. I'm just saying I should be one of many voices you should listen to when it comes to trans topics. And so I constantly kept seeing that crop up, and it was really bothering me. Now, there's a whole other conversation to be had around intersectionality, another buzzword. A leftist saying intersectionality, but about like how the intersectionality of identities influences decisions as well. Like Ben Shapiro, for example, his place in society is he is a conservative. He is generally more economically well off. So there might be something to say that maybe his economic background might be more influencing his choices than his Jewish background, for example, or someone like Blair White, for example, maybe her economic background or the fact that a lot of her base is conservative means that she's going to be more influenced by conservative talking points and say more conservative things that might go against her trans identity. This is, again, intersectional discussions that we can go into all day. And I don't want to dismiss those topics within that because that is a much larger conversation about how people's intersecting identities can influence how they discuss certain topics and sometimes willing to go against their interest in one identity because it goes for their interest in another identity. I'm not necessarily saying that's what is happening here. I may believe that, but to sort of separate it from that, that is a dynamic that comes into play here. But the thing that I want you to take away from this conversation specifically is when you are talking about things that may potentially be harmful to a community or controversial within a community, it is onus on you if you are not part of that community, if you want to talk about if that thing is harmful to that community, to then look at the community as a whole and hear what that whole community has to say. And I know that that's tiring. I know that that is hard to be like, every time that something comes up that might be anti-Semitic, that I need to listen to a bunch of people in the Jewish community to be able to hear it. It's like, yes, you do. If you are going to go out and talk about something as if you can authoritatively say that it's anti-Semitic or not, and you are not Jewish, then the onus is on you to go and listen to the Jewish community on that fact. You can't just speak for them whether they were harmed or not. Now, you can have your own opinion. I'm not saying that you can't have your own opinion on something. You can have your own opinion on whether something was offensive or harmful. I'm not saying don't have your own opinion. I'm just saying if you want that opinion to be informed, if you want that opinion to be backed up by, understanding what the community says, then the onus is on you to listen to that community. You don't get to go and say, I'm not Jewish, but I know one Jewish person who said this was an anti-Semitic, so it's totally okay. It's like, no, you can say, I think this is anti-Semitic for X, Y, and Z. That's my opinion. But I have not listened to the community as a whole yet, so let me go and hear what they have to say. Or you can say something like, this is my opinion on this is anti-Semitic, and it's backed up by the fact that I listened to, all these Jewish commentators, I listened to all these Jewish people, and sort of this is what they were saying about it, and sort of this led me to this conclusion and this thought. Just be aware of what is informing or not informing your opinion, rather than just sort of like pointing towards one person to back up an opinion that you already have. because I think that that's what a lot of people do. People already have an opinion or thought on Gina Carano and are looking for someone to corroborate that opinion. So they look to like, all right, well, I feel like Gina Carano wasn't offensive, so I'm going to look for a Jewish person who said that it wasn't offensive. Oh, look, Ben Shapiro said it, so therefore it's okay. Like, no, that's not how that works. I'm not saying that that can't be the case, that it wasn't offensive. Again, I'm not Jewish. I can't speak for everyone in the Jewish community, but the onus is on you to listen to the Jewish community before you say something like that. So that's sort of the dynamic that I really kind of wanted to hone in on. So long story short, listen to communities, and corporations are awful. Oh, God. I am a leftist, aren't I? Right there, just gonna people are gonna come after me just for that. But I really hope that me having this conversation, I'm trying to be very clear, just to sort of wrap this out, that like, yes, very clearly I have a leftist bent to my conversations. And I say leftist, not liberal. That's an important distinction, by the way, because people call me a liberal stooge. I'm not a liberal, I'm a leftist. Very different distinction. I want to make clear that like these conversations that I'm having here are not here to like attack you if you are a person who is on the right. I am so not interested. I am so not interested in having this right versus left discussion, at least when it comes down to people who aren't in, working in politics. Yes, there's something to be talked about, like Republicans versus Democrats versus like the coalitions that we can talk about in politics. But in terms of like conversations on this level and how we interact with each other, I think it is so limiting and feeds into a false fight that we don't need to be fighting of like, oh, it's right versus left. I'm not here I identify as a leftist, but I'm not here to like say like, you person on the right there, you're awful and need to be canceled and are stupid and I hate you. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to just say like we can have conversations about this sort of stuff because there's a lot more nuance in it, and it's a lot more about it's about class. It's about people who have more power over you. I have a lot more in common with you than I have to say with Joe Biden, for example. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling into a leftist rant here, so I'm gonna end this out. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed my leftist rant. I am interested to see how this comment section goes. Please try and keep it in good faith as much as possible. I know that that's going to be a hard case here, but like, please disagree with me. Please disagree with me. I am totally fine with that. I want you to, but keep it in good faith. Let's not insult each other. If you want me to listen to you, calling me stupid or dumb or hypocrite or, insulting me because I'm trans, because I got a little bit of that too, none of that's going to endear you to me and none of that's going to make me listen. I'm just going to ignore your comment or maybe even delete it if it's truly offensive. But if you want to have an actual conversation, even if you disagree with me, let's have it. But so keep it in good faith. Anyways, thank you so much. I hope you're all doing well. I wish you all the best. And thank you so much. And don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, have a Patreon if you want to help me out there. And beyond that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, you are my patrons. You are so awesome. So here are your names. Catherine Lambeth, Eli Berg Moss, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Miranda Janelle, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillim, Stephen Kleinard, Camille T, Randy Thompson, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Rick Osborne, Roar, Ish the Mad, Piston Twisted Garage, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Carmen Olson, William Stewart, Amanda Ronya, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Andrew Jorgensen, BBD, Jason Knott, Maeve, saying it twice because I can, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Nathan Steele, Skylar Gray, Lily, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Bush, Jane Packard, Geek, Filter, Mari Neckard, Jacob Tovar, Polymenia, Celestial Dawn, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam Din, Mark the Edge, Corey Honkanen, and Vale the Pale Dunn, Lysa, W. Randy Eady, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, and finally, Michael Hardy. I am sorry for that, but seriously, thank you so much, patrons. You really mean the world to me, and you really are changing my life, even if I may have changed your life for the worst with my singing. Thank you so much for all of your support.